The KFM News. The KFM News. The KFM News. The KFM News. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
The time is now 13 hours. Welcome to the main news. Today, the 12th of August 2024. To present it, I'm Jack Mapembulo. We also welcome our viewers on our WhatsApp, on our Facebook page, and the YouTube. We first take a look at the top stories. Bishop Patrick Chilekwa Chisanga calls for the conservation and preservation of natural inhabitants. Government to hold a meeting with the DRC following the temporary closure of the borders. The Socialist Party calls for a clear plan to industrialization. In international news, landslide at Uganda rubbish dump kills 21. In sports, the Paris Olympics has come to an end in a captivating closing ceremony.
The KFM News. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
And now the news in detail. Mansa Diocese Bishop Reverend Patrick Chilekwa Chisanga has called for the conservation and preservation of natural inhabitants as districts are being developed. Bishop Chisanga says government and other stakeholders must engage partners in development to ensure that indiscriminate destruction to natural inhabitants are avoided. He observed the need to guard jealously the environment as construction activities take center stage. He said this during the elevation of St. Peter the Apostle sub-parish to a full status of a parish in Ilunga district. His Royal Highness Chief Nsamba, Chief Kasomalunga, Area Member of Parliament Engineer Chanda Katotowe, and councillors from Ropra constituency wards attended the Mass. Bishop Chisanga emphasized that the onus is on chiefs, members of Parliament, and other leaders to ensure that natural inhabitants are conserved. He specifically urged Engineer Katotowe to lobby Parliament so as to come up with policies to regulate on how certain places can be developed without disturbing the ecological system. Bishop Chisanga said the Lunga district is good for tourism sector, hence the need to protect natural inhabitants, saying the generations to come would laugh at the current leaders if they fail to preserve the natural inhabitants. In his homily, Bishop Chisanga also highlighted the history of the Catholic Church in Lunga, saying the missionaries from Santa Maria Parish in Chilubi visited Lunga some 104 years ago. He said God had already planned that Lunga will have its own parish from a sub-parish. Speaking earlier before the Mass, Engineer Katotowe thanked Bishop Chisanga for elevating the sub-parish to a full parish status. He said this will no doubt help the people in drawing closer to God and help them to engage in negative vices. Not to engage, rather. Bishop Chisanga since installed Father Dominic Charwe as parish priest of St. Peter, the Apostle Parish. A delegation of government officials will today hold a meeting with the DRC government following the temporary closure of the borders by the Zambian government. The meeting will be held in Lubumbashi. Minister of Commerce Chipuka Mulenga expressed hope that a solution will be found and that the borders can be opened soon. He said what Zambia wants is peace at the borders in order for trade to take place. Mr. Mulenga said the closure of the borders between Zambia and the DRC has nothing to do with political differences. He said Zambia and DRC are friends who have worked together for many years. He disclosed that his DRC counterpart called him to see how best they can resolve the problem, which was caused by the DRC government's ban on importation of Zambian products. Mr. Mulenga expressed hope that a solution will be found during a press briefing at Kasumbalesa border shortly before crossing the border into the DRC. And Copperbelt Minister Elisha Matambo said people should not use this for their political benefit. He said there is peace at all borders that Zambia shares with the DRC and that today's meeting is aimed at resolving the issues. Socialist Party in Luapula province says Zambia will not become a middle-income industrialization country by the year 2030 as long as power generation continues to be a problem in the country. Speaking at KFM radio on Saturday evening during special interviews, Luapula Province Socialist Party spokesperson Kaunda Kapwepwe says that there is need for the nation to ensure that issues of power and fuel are stabilized in order to support industrialization. Mr. Kapwepwe says the setting up of a fertilizer production companies will help meet the demand for low cost of inputs for increased production in the country. Mr. Kapwepwe says that the country lacks a clear roadmap to industrialization under the UPND and President Hichilema. He says the manner under which load shedding is managed in the country is horrible, as power may go at 07 hours and come back at midnight, making it impossible for businesses to function normally.
Vision 2030. Vision 2030 land of become a middle income industrialized nation. Okay. How do you industrialize this nation? This nation. In short, ama industry yabombe bwino bagwate pango mufundo mulamu Zambia kuma kinashobora kutira twakatana kuri energy sector because ama industry tete fry ma industry tete pa mungu ngachakwe energy sector bombe ama light ya pa mungu amba wa umutengo wa kushita fuel ile kuweko ngaya ya pa mungu. Okay, I'm a load shedding. We fail to manage power supply. You know, it's laughable because we understand, we know very well that, like you know, saying that might 07 effect. Yeah, well, at midnight, 24 hours.
Some residents of the Mabumba have expressed worry at the failure to secure their livestock in the chiefdom. Speaking to KFM News yesterday, Mr. Kaplin Waria says that villages such as Langi, Kambone, Komanga, and the Mabumba area are experiencing issues of property damage due to animals that are usually left roaming without control by their owners. Mr. Waria says despite the chief clearly stating the need for keeping livestock enclosed, subjects have not respected the order from the traditional leader on animal management. Meanwhile, Cephas Philabi has bemoaned the increased Kachasu trade in the area. He says headmen are going behind the back of the chief and charge a fee to brewers of Kachasu and urge them to be careful and not to be caught by the chief's messengers. Mr. Fibale says such actions by the village headmen are ruining the peace and health of residents in the chiefdom. Mines and Minerals Development Minister Paul Kabuswe has disclosed that about 273 artisanal mining licenses have been exclusively granted to indigenous Zambians since the UPND formed government in 2021. Mr. Kabuswe, in an interview with Phoenix News, says the initiative aims to empower small-scale miners and enable them to reap the rewards of the country's natural resources. The minister says his ministry has since launched an orientation program across the country to educate the small-scale miners on how to effectively utilize their licenses, observe safety, and that the government is also providing artisanal miners with equipment. He says government has also established a gold aggregator who will purchase from the miners at fair price in order to eliminate the involvement of foreign individuals and opportunistic buyers. Mr. Kabuswe emphasizes that this move demonstrates the new Dawn administration's commitment to ensuring that Zambians benefit from their own natural resources and that it will foster job creation and alleviate poverty within mining communities. And our Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister Dmytro Kuleba has urged Zambia to improve its agricultural productivity amidst increasing demand for food globally. Mr. Kuleba says Zambia should adopt the initiatives Ukraine used to improve its productivity, such as improving the farmers' capacities to produce more by investing heavily in high-quality seed and involving technology solutions in the management of crops. He says agriculture mechanization is also a significant initiative to improve productivity, and that if these initiatives are used, Zambia is better placed to become a food basket, especially as demand for food in Africa and across the globe increases. Mr. Kuleba says his country has managed to be one of the world's top producers of grains amidst geopolitical tensions because it remains consistent in striving to increase productivity and capacity to produce and export agricultural products. The Zambia Compulsory Standards Agency, ZCSA, is appealing to farmers across the country to be cautious when buying fertilizer to avoid falling prey to fraudulent schemes by unscrupulous traders. This comes in the wake of a recent enforcement action by a combined team of officers from ZCSA and other state institutions at a named company in Lusaka's Balason area, which was packaging a mixture of black soil and lime in bags from a non-fertilizer supplier. ZCSA Acting Manager Communications and Public Relations Brian Atioka explains that the product, which was meant to be supplied to unsuspecting farmers in Lusaka and eastern provinces, has since been restricted as investigations continue. Mr. Atioka has since warned of stern action against all entities and individuals involved in such schemes as the country prepares for the 2024-2025 farming season. He says there will be no stone left unturned in this enforcement action in all corners of the country, as such products which have not been authorized as required by the Compulsory Standards Act number 3 of 2017 can cause reduced crop yields and impact negatively on consumers and the economy. Now, before we get to the international news, a recap on the top stories. Bishop Patrick Chirikwachi-Sanga calls for the conservation and preservation of natural inhabitants. Government to hold a meeting with the DRC following the temporary closure of the borders. And the Socialist Party calls for a clear plan to industrialization. We'll take a break.
News. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
And now in international news, at least 21 people are now known to have died after a landslide at a massive rubbish dump in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Rescuers are continuing to dig through the worst in the hope of finding more survivors after the landslide, which followed weeks of torrential rain. The 14-hectare Kitezi landfill is the only one saving the whole of Kampala, a city home to an estimated 4 million people. Kampala Mayor Elias Lukwago told the AFP news agency it was a disaster that was bound to happen and that many, many more could be still buried. The city authorities have reportedly been trying to find a new site for many years. A huge hill formed by the building up of rubbish collapsed late on Friday night, burying houses on the edge of the site while residents were asleep, reporting the Reuters news agency. President Yoweri Museveni has ordered an investigation into how people had been allowed to live so close to the potentially hazardous and dangerous heap and ordered the removal of those in what he called the danger zone. On Saturday, the death toll was given as 8, including 2 children. Kampala police spokesman Vic Onyango told AFP on Sunday that more bodies had since been retrieved, while 14 people had been rescued. Russia on Monday evacuated civilians from parts of a second region next to Ukraine after Kyiv increased military activity near the border just days after its biggest incursion into sovereign Russian territory since the start of the 2022 war. Ukrainian forces rammed through the Russian border last Tuesday and swept across some western parts of Russian Kursk region, a surprise attack that may be aimed at gaining leverage in possible ceasefire talks after the election in November. Apparently caught by surprise, Russia by Sunday had stabilized the front in the Kursk region, though Ukraine had carved out a sliver of Russian territory where battles were continuing on Monday, according to Russian bloggers. In the neighboring Belgorod region to the south, regional governor Vyacheslav Glachkov said evacuations had begun from the Krasnaya Yaruga district due to enemy activity on the border. And finally, in sports, the Paris Olympics has come to an end in a captivating closing ceremony in the French capital, bringing down the curtain on 16 days of thrilling action. More than 10,000 athletes competed in Paris across hundreds of events in a hugely entertaining Olympic Games. The city's landmarks provided an enthralling backdrop for many of the events. Some events were held outside the capital, with the sailing and windsurfing in the Bay of Marseille and the surfing contest almost 10,000 miles away in Tahiti, French Polynesia. For the athletes, the Games was the culmination of years of training and sacrifice. After the drama and emotion of the Olympics, the countdown now begins for the Paralympic Games, which begins on 28 August and is also being held in Paris. We now come to the end of this news bulletin, but before I run a recap on the top stories, Bishop Patrick Chilekwa Chisanga calls for the conservation and preservation of natural inhabitants. Government to hold a meeting with the DRC following the temporary closure of the borders. The Socialist Party calls for a clear plan to industrialization. Landslide at Uganda rubbish dump kills 21. In sports, the Paris Olympics has come to an end in a captivating closing ceremony. Ends the news at 13 hours. We have the last bulletin of the day at 18:15. But before that, we have the news coming up at 16, the news headlines at 14 hours. But don't forget, we still have the news summary at 20 hours. On behalf of the news crew at K, I'm Jack Mapembodo. Keep listening to the Lunchtime Show.
If it matters to you, it matters to us. Together.
Music on Primary Protein, taking and making together radio just got bigger.
Hi.
Just enjoy
Your wish for the next
stream
good energy drink.
I think I'm achieving a